Hi everyone, welcome to our Cyber Week online special Meet the Experts. Our first speaker is Mixael Swan Laufer, mathematician, high-energy physician, perpetually disruptive. Michael will talk about individualized pharmaceutical manufacturing.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michaellaufer. I'm Chief Spokesman for the Fourth Yeast Vinegar Collective, and I'm a Senior Research Fellow in a number of research institutes, both in the US and overseas. The Fourth Yeast Vinegar Collective is an anarchist collective that is a consortium of people throughout the world, and we work to try to bring medicines and medical technologies to people who need them but don't have them. It's really great to be here. It's amazing to see some of the people who've spoken previously, both people who are leaders of industry and government, and also some of the incredible hackers like David Ishii, Nathan Parker, and Nina Ali. I, however, come from the darker end of the street, where we look at trying to help, whether or not it's sanctioned by government or whether it's legal. We look at the places where infrastructure breaks down and we try and fill that gap. Oftentimes when you're looking at medical policy, what you're looking at is a macro ethical structure, trying to do the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people with the resources that you have. However, it's important to remember that there's also a micro ethical structure that we have to look at. When there's a person who's suffering, that person has to be looked after. And we can't just turn a blind eye and say it's just too bad not everybody gets the help they need. If the infrastructure fails, there needs to be a stopgap. And that's what we always seek to do. So if you've heard of us, it's probably through the publicity that we got with a very early side project that was the EpiPen, when the industry failed to deliver EpiPens, both according to need, also according to quality control when they were failing. And additionally, when they were priced out of reach for so many people who needed them, the world started screaming for an alternative. And when you look at the needs that are served by an EpiPen, it's not terribly complicated. It's something that gives an intramuscular injection. And so we provided something that was an alternative that you could make yourself at home with no special tools or expertise for $30 instead of the $600 that it normally costs. And we've worked since then to do a lot of things that were similar. We look at the things for people who are underserved. And again, one of the key things is we try and look for where that impact is the greatest. And the four things that we tend to focus on the most include drug overdoses, specifically opiates, botched abortions in places where abortion is criminalized, hepatitis C, and HIV. The interesting thing about this is that there are chemical solutions to all of this. Now, this is naloxone. This can reverse an opiate overdose immediately. This is Sovaldi. This, with a 12-week regimen, can actually cure somebody of hepatitis C. Here you see cabotegravir, which is a new generation antiretroviral that will suppress viral load of HIV and also act as a pre-exposure prophylaxis for a period of 4 months at a time with a single injection. Here you see mifepristone and misoprostol, which when combined in pill form can give an abortion with no need for supervision from a professional medical practitioner. All of these solutions are simple enough, and yet they're not accessible to most people who need them. And that's merely because of the failure of infrastructure. Infrastructure tends to fail for one of three reasons. You either have a lack of legality, you either have it priced outside of people's range, or you merely have infrastructure which is barriered from getting things to people in places. Either there wasn't infrastructure to start with, or there are sanctions or barriers or conflict zones that keep people out of the loop. So how do you fix this sort of a problem? How do you bring a chemical solution to people who don't have it? Well, fairly simply, you merely bring the chemistry to them. If you can't get the infrastructure to serve those people, you merely build the infrastructure on the spot. Now, what you're looking at here are two examples of automated chemical reactors. These are used in labs all over the world, labs that are well-to-do. If you are not in a well-funded lab, these sorts of rather tedious tasks of babysitting a beaker, making sure that it's at the right temperature and it's stirred and that nothing's going wrong, is left to a graduate student. But when you have more money than time, then you allocate graduate students to the things that machines can't do, and you replace them with machines. Now the question is, well, why aren't these machines available to everybody? Well, they're not open source material, and so they're covered by a whole bunch of intellectual property laws. Additionally, they're extraordinarily expensive because any lab that's going to have the budget for something like this, they can price it up a good deal. And furthermore, they don't sell to the general public. They will only give a sale of one of these units to something that is registered as a lab under whatever sort of conditions they feel are appropriate. So how do you bring this to people so that infrastructure can be micro-miniaturized and individualized? Well, that was the main project, our flagship project that we started doing. This is the Apothecary Micro Lab in one of its earlier incarnations. And what you can see on the left here is two canning jars, one inside the other, which is very similar to the jacketed reactor you saw on the last slide. And there's a 3D printed core inside that allows reagents to go in and out, the fluid that regulates temperature to go in and out of the outer jar, and a stirring rod to go down the center. Now, as you can see on the right, you've got an Arduino unit that's sort of patched together with a breadboard. This is one of our very early versions. Later, we made a variation that ran off of a Raspberry Pi Zero, and you can see this is the next iteration of the core. Later, that core was made into so it could be printed in just one piece instead of being bolted together. And then, most lately, the version that we're working with now, all of the pieces merely snap together. There's no soldering required, and you'll see that in the slides slightly later. One of the things that we've been focusing on is drug delivery systems. Now, previously, we wanted to do drug manufacture to be able to press things into tablets or put things into capsules. That's a fairly good drug delivery system, but not everything works that way. And of course, it's limited in its scope, especially when you think about the timing. Oftentimes, you need something that's going to deploy more quickly or deploy over a longer period of time, and a pill just won't cut it. Now, one thing that we did is we figured out ways to develop transdermal patches at home. You can do this fairly simply with some dimethyl sulfoxide, a piece of gauze, some medical tape, and some saran wrap. Also, things that would normally be developed through inhalers, we figured out ways to hijack vape pens and merely replace the cartridges that normally have your sort of smoky nicotine delivery system and replace it with medicines. And then, of course, there are other delivery mechanisms, including injections and transdermal implants. Now, this one's actually quite exciting. Now, what you're looking at here is a small piece of plastic. It's a copolymer of PLA and MMA, and what it does is it's extruded in a way that has a certain drug embedded in it, and so it will release over a long period of time. This has already been used for many, many years in the medical field to deliver contraceptives to women. It was originally marketed as Norplant. The latest version is called Nexplanon, and it was recently approved in the US also for pre-exposure prophylaxis against HIV. Additionally, it's used for buprenorphine in Canada, and it's proven remarkably effective. This solves a lot of problems that one has when trying to administer medication. The biggest problem when trying to administer medication is adherence. Oftentimes, especially with chronic issues, you are giving somebody a medicine that they need to take under the same conditions at the same time every day, day in, day out, for their entire lives. And if something goes wrong, they're sick one day, they forget, or they throw their pills up, or there's a time zone shift, they cross the international date line, and they mistake one day for another, then all of a sudden everything goes wrong. And their viral load spikes, or their exposure spikes, or their cell count goes down. Any number of things can go wrong. If you can replace that with an implant, then it only needs to be administered once, and that problem goes away. Sovaldi, which I mentioned earlier, again, is a 12-week regimen. An interesting statistic from the United States is that only 60% of, I'm sorry, that's reversed. Only 40%, 60% of people who start the regimen don't complete it. And that can be fixed if you merely administer all of it in an implant at once. When you look at the potential uses, there are so many. Anything that has to be administered on a daily basis for any length of time all of a sudden becomes something that only has to be administered once, and you don't have to deal with adherence problems. So it's a very attractive solution. Now, how's this manufactured? Well, it's a fairly simple process. You take your plastic powder and you take your active pharmaceutical ingredient and you put it into a funnel that then gets pushed down a screw, and it's in a jacketed heater. And so in that space, then what happens is it's compressed and it gets pressed out a dye. Now, the magical thing about this is that this technology is not terribly sophisticated, and it's already being done by hobbyists all over the world. When you look at this phenomenon, it's the same thing that's done by people who are 3D printing enthusiasts who are trying to recycle their prints. They'll take their failed 3D prints, they will shred them up, and then they'll put them back into one of these machines that will push out an extruded filament that they can run through their 3D printer again. The exact same technology can be used to manufacture these sorts of implants. And then implanting them is a fairly simple process. All it takes is the same sort of mechanism that you would use to put in an RFID chip implant that a lot of people have in their hand. I have one. You can see one of these in the slide here. It's merely a hollow needle, and the thing that you're trying to implant under the skin sits inside the needle, and you have a little plunger. You pinch the skin, you tense it up, you slide the needle inside, and then you depress the plunger, and then you pull it back out, and that's it. There are no sutures involved. There's no numbing of the area that's necessary. It's all extremely simple. And so this is the sort of thing that can be done boots on the ground by people without any infrastructure, or by humanitarian groups who decide to take things into their own hands as well. Now, the question is, of course, all right, well, these delivery mechanisms are great, and of course, we need to focus on them and know how to get the drugs to the people who need them. But what about the active pharmaceutical ingredient? How do you manufacture an active pharmaceutical ingredient? Well, this, of course, goes back to our original flagship project, the Apothecary Micro Lab. This is me holding our latest incarnation in a 3D printed case, and here are the pieces. There are two main sections to the core. This is the CPU subassembly that runs off of Raspberry Pi. There's a relay board that switches on and off a number of things, including the heating elements, the circulating pump, and the stirring assembly. And then there's an LCD interface. Now that's a touch screen, so the entire thing is entirely self-contained. And if you look, you can see that the headers merely push together. These things literally just stack up on one another and snap together. This doesn't require anybody to have any technical expertise or any bent toward being technical in order to assemble it. This is the other half, which is connected via USB. This is an Arduino Uno and a CNC shield, and this runs the subassemblies that push the pumps that pump in the active ingredients at particular times and continue to monitor the system for stasis. Here's our cute little imitation of an IKEA informational pamphlet on how to manufacture things. This was actually made by a yellow journalism site that was trying to make fun of us, but we reclaimed it because it seems like a good format. And so here you can see how it gets wired together in the various pieces. And if this runs the way I expect it to, you're going to see here a video in real time. We can't watch the whole thing, but we'll watch the beginning. This is our chief hardware engineer, and he's actually assembling the unit in real time. And you can actually see how these snap together. And that's the relay board. And now he's putting the individual drivers for the stepper motor controls onto the CNC hat. And then you'll see that he's going to take that unit and snap it on top of the Arduino. This is all very simple. And what you're looking at here are a bunch of 3D printed parts and a couple of parts from the hardware store. And this is everything that it takes to assemble the entire unit. Notice also that he only has one hex key and one screwdriver, and that's enough to assemble the entire thing. So I'll cut it short because I only have a half hour here and we're about halfway through, but you can see that the assembly process is not a technical one. He's not doing anything special. He's merely screwing things together and bolting pieces and plugging them in. If you want to see the entire thing, I encourage you to check my DEF CON talk where this thing runs in the background for the entirety of my chat. Now, the next question is, okay, that's perfectly well and good if you have an automated chemical reactor, but how do you program an automated chemical reactor to actually do the chemistry that you want it to do? Isn't that a tricky thing? Well, yes, of course it is. And that's important. So one of the teams at Four Thieves Vinegar is a data science team that works specifically to develop synthesis pathways for drugs that have fewer steps, have greater margins for error, so it's harder to make a mistake, and are simpler, don't require specialized machinery, specialized techniques, or specialized equipment. Now, how do you do that with data science? Well, there was a startup about 4 years ago that was trying to do something very similar. They had built an extremely sophisticated machine learning system that would crawl through the entirety of chemical literature back hundreds of years and try to synthesize the various ideas that were present to give some guesses on how it might be possible to manufacture something. And we worked with them briefly, but they were unfortunately acquired by Merck, and Merck has internalized all of that technology. It's no longer available to the public. That said, it is just a data science problem, and there are databases that are available that one can use to run very similar software. And so we did that. The problem is, of course, that you need a supercomputer to do it. And it was a bit of a conundrum because you have to ask, all right, well, if you need a supercomputer to run the software, how do you get a supercomputer when you don't have a supercomputer? Now, oftentimes, again, you have to think about people who are in the positions where they're so sufficiently desperate that they're going to be manufacturing their own medications. Most people would say, oh, well, if you need a supercomputer, why not use Google Cloud, or why not use Amazon Web Services? But from the position of somebody who's in a state of desperation, these are not accessible because these are solutions for which you have to pay repeatedly. This is a money hemorrhage problem. We were trying to figure out how you solve that problem with a one-time cost. So we managed to acquire an HP Proliant DL580, and this is a supercomputer. It's an old supercomputer, but it's just as good as it was when it was new. We bought one used for $350, and this is an extraordinarily powerful piece of hardware. If you look at it, it's a 4U rack mount unit, and it has 40 cores and half a terabyte of RAM. It's entirely modular, so you can expand it. It has 4 1,500 watt power supplies. There's an incredible amount of redundancy. And of course, most of the time, we don't even have to run it anywhere near its full capacity. But what we're looking to do is to develop a way to network it so that people within our community can use it when needed, and that also we have it available to our data science team so that anytime they need to run a simulation or develop a new synthesis pathway for a drug, they can just run it on the computer. Now, this is sort of what the software looks like. This is a sort of rebranded distro of ASCOS that came out of Stanford. And you can see the input here under target compound. You put it in the SMILES format, which is an ASCII format for being able to input chemical structure. And when you do that, you then can give it a certain number of parameters, and then you run it. And this is the output that you'll see. There's your target molecule, and then you'll start to see things come up with these metrics. All right, are the precursors purchasable? How long did it take to compute this? Now, how likely is this to actually work? And this works as an incredible leveraging tool so that instead of having to have an entire team of extraordinarily gifted chemists work for years on a new synthesis pathway, you could have one very competent chemist work for a few weeks with this as help, sort of accentuating their intuition. Here's another example of it being run. And again, you can see this is a specific solution that it goes through, a series of them. And when it talks about what's needed in terms of a catalyst, what sort of solvents are needed, and you can run it for a bunch of different parameters. You can make sure that the solvents are affordable. You can make sure that they're legal. You can make sure that they're commercially available. You can make sure that there are things that you're running that are non-toxic. And we're very excited to try and use this a whole lot more. So to start to sort of sum up this question of how do you solve the problem of trying to treat disease on an individualized basis in the absence of infrastructure, there's a chain of things that you need to solve. And ultimately, you want to solve them in relatively reverse order. The thing you'd like to start with is to say, well, if I had the treatment, how would I package it? What is this? Is this a pill? Is this an inhaler? Is this an injection? Is this a subdermal implant? If I had what I needed, what would be the easiest way to give this to somebody? What would be the way where this would be most likely to succeed? And then you have to work your way backwards and say, all right, how would I build that? From there, then again, you step one further back and you have to say, all right, then what is the process for building that you have? And previous to that, you have to then determine needs, which is an entirely separate problem. But it's important to recognize that the question of health in general, there are two things. First off, it's a human problem. And though we'd like to take a technical solution and bring it to try to solve that human problem, the technical portion can only solve part of it. The other part is that we have to convince people to seize the power that they need, to empower themselves, to not be afraid to utilize the science that people with letters after their names and people with institutional affiliations use if their life's on the line. How do they fix that? We need to give people the courage to be able to be invested in their own health. And the other thing to keep in mind is that we need to build those tools. We need to build tools that are more accessible. We can't just say, go learn a bunch of chemistry and figure it out and go buy some lab equipment. We need to figure out ways to bridge the gap. The same way that computers were something that looked inaccessible to most people in the 1980s, and that rapid prototyping was something that 10 years ago was not terribly popular outside of a very niche industry. And now everybody has a computer. Everybody has three. The word 3D printing gets thrown around and it's a household word. Everybody recognizes it. we need to start doing the same thing with every other facet of science. And specifically, we need to start doing it with health, because so long as that is barriered from regular people, so long as people are afraid to take care of themselves, they will forever be at the mercy of the authorities. So I think I have about 5 minutes left, and this is where you can learn more about us. You can go to fourthievesvinegar.org, where our website is. If you have questions, or you'd like to chat or get in touch, or you'd like to work with us on a project, we are always looking for coalitions and other organizations to work with. And if you're a little more paranoid, you can use our Onion address if you like to use Tor. And given there are 4 minutes left, if there's a question or two, I can try and take them. Or I can talk about some upcoming projects. I'll defer to the moderator now. Nope. Well, if I'm not getting anything, then one thing I will. So did I get a note? Bear with me here. Looks like. All right. So one project that we're very excited about. There is a coalition with whom we're working in Italy, and they have developed an open source automatic external defibrillator. This was developed 3 years ago in 2017 as a proof of concept test of another project where they built an entire platform for developing open source medical devices specifically for sub-Saharan Africa. And despite the fact that they did a fantastic job, managed to document everything, source every part, and make this something that could be approved and also something that can be built very easily using off-the-shelf parts with their instructions, nobody's heard of it. So what we're looking to do is to try to publicize it and try to repackage it with some tutorials and some walkthroughs. And we're very excited because there's no other medical device out there that saves lives quite as miraculously as the external defibrillator. If somebody is in VFib or VTAC and you put on the AED, it can bring them right back. If you've ever seen one work, it's about as close to a miracle as you get. It's like the movies when somebody just wakes up. So we're extraordinarily excited about doing that, and we look forward to bringing that to people around the first of the year. So that's most of what I have. It looks like I still have 2 minutes. I can't tell if the clock is syncing with my clock, but it looks close. So I would like to thank my hosts again for having me in, and to say for anybody who's interested in what we do, please come check us out. There's a contact us page on the website, and you can write to us with ideas. If you have projects that you'd like to partner with us on, we're always looking for people to work with. Additionally, if you have ideas of things that haven't seen the light of day, but you think should, we're always interested in hearing about them. We've gotten some really interesting ideas over the years from people. That's been great. And also, if you'd just like to give us a word of encouragement that you like what we do, it's always nice to know that people notice what we're doing and are excited about our ideas. So remember, again, also that we're looking for people. So if you are a person who works with any form of technology in any sort of health, or are just interested in global health and human rights as something you'd like to get involved in, feel free to get in touch. We could always use more people. We could always use the help, and we'd love to hear from you. So my clock seems to have stopped again, so I think I'm about out of time. I'll say thanks again, and I look forward to meeting you all in person one day when it's safe to travel again. Thanks so much.